Good morning. This session is going to continue with the general ledger. We're going to go ahead and log in, and we're going to learn how to use the general ledger module. In the general ledger module, it is specifically used for summarization. Many times when you start a general ledger, you get bogged down in detail. The whole purpose of a general ledger is to bring up what's called the subledgers into the general ledger and summarize it. So for instance, a lot of people, one of the biggest mistakes people make in general ledger is they say, well, I want to know how much income I made with handbags, and I want to know how much income I made with wallets, and I want to know how much income I made with keychains. Well, it doesn't really matter for the general ledger purposes because those figures can be drawn from what's called the subledger. In other words, from the sales modules, you can draw reports that'll give you the details of where all that income comes from. It's always better to simply bring it up as sales. Now, in your case, if you have two different divisions, which you do, you have the import division and you have the earn division, the Raj import side, you want to keep that separate. So that's identified with a separate sales account. And the chart of accounts that I put in your system is a standardized chart of accounts. It came from another customer, so that we don't have to hand type it in. Okay, so are there any questions on what the purpose of a general ledger is? Okay, so one of the things I do when I get started is I show you from menu to menu. Again, I'm going to reiterate or recap that when you want to add a record or change a record, it's always done in the Maintain Files section of the module. So in this case, we're going to go through some series of setups. One of the things that you need to be aware of is when you set your general ledger up, you have to actually set it up correctly. If you set, this is the primary key to the entire system. If this is set up wrong, nothing will work. Seriously. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go to the general ledger system options. In the general ledger system options, you have to define what your account number is going to look like. I've identified your general ledger with 5-digit account numbers. It makes it a lot easier for flexibility. One thing you need to be aware of, and this is how I like to set my general ledgers up, are standard accounting practices, or generally accepted accounting practice, which is also known as GAAP, which you'll hear me say frequently. Ones are assets. Any account that starts with the number 1 is an asset. Any account that starts with the number 2 is a liability. Any account that starts with a 3 is an equity account. Any account that starts with a 4 is an income account, and now we get into the nitty-gritty of the system. I personally like to associate all cost of good accounts starting with a 5. I like to associate all marketing expenses with a 6, and I like to do general accounts or general operating expenses with a 7, or extraordinary expenses with an 8, and suspense or tax liabilities with a 9. I like to separate those. It's up to you how you want to do it, but that's how I like to do it, simply because I like to break it down on my financial report that way. Based on how you set your account numbers up is how you identify how your financial report is going to look. So I've chosen 5 digits. In our system we have a retained earnings and we have a current earnings. Current earnings are what your net profit or loss is for the year. Retained earnings, once you close the year, moves that amount into that account automatically at the end of the year when you close your year. You don't necessarily need to close each module at the end of each month. It can be closed at any time, and I highly recommend that the general ledger be kept open 1 month in advance. So for instance, if you're closing the month of February in your sales order module, you would be closing your January general ledger. Okay? And the reason for that is there's always adjustments to be made in the prior period. I don't recommend you close the year for the first 3 months in the general ledger because you will always have adjusting entries until probably around March when you finalize your books. Reopening a period, while it can be done, it's not recommended. You can reopen a year. If you reopen a year or a period, you must go through the physical closing of that period again, so that all of the numbers get moved forward properly. And you'll see as we go through this that numbers that you move forward are called beginning balances, and they're in period 00. Okay, so here I'm identifying when my year ends. You're on a 12-month calendar year, so your year ends on 12/31/08. This is a journal batch number ticker so that it knows what the last batch number was and what to increment to the next one. This is how many years to store data. I put 99. You can put anything you want. This is how many months or periods there are in one of your calendar or fiscal years. I put it as 12. Some people use 13 and use that 13th month for their adjusting journals. You're not big enough to worry about that. And you're not going to be big enough for a long, long time, so I wouldn't worry about it. This is the current period that we're in. It says we're in period 5, which is May. And that's because I have not closed the general ledger for this company at this time because we don't have beginning balances in. We're going to want to put beginning balances in, then we're going to close the month of May, and we'll be in the proper period. This is, do your periods end on the last day of the month? Some people end their period on the 30th of every month or on the 26th of every month, and that's it. So if I had said no to this, it would pop up another box and says, okay, what is the last day of each one of your periods? Okay? This is asking me if I want to be able to output to Excel, and if I do, where can I find my Excel print? So it's just sort of mapping. Any questions on the general system defaults? Okay, so now we're going to go to the period end dates. This tells me what years I have in the system. So if I click on any one of them, it'll tell me the months that I have set up. So right now I've set you up through the year 2011. But let's say, for instance, it comes to 2011 and you're ready to go to the next year. To do that, you would hit F3, put the ending year in, 12/31/12, and what is the first day of the year, which is 01/01/12. The system will automatically ask you, well, do you want me to go ahead as the computer to set up your periods for you, or do you want to manually do it? Who wants to do it manually? Nobody. So I'm going to say copy the same number of periods from last year and create my periods. It'll automatically create it, and this turns out that this is a leap year. The year 1212 is 2012 is a leap year, so I need to come up here to February and change it to 29. Otherwise, it won't let me out of this screen. When I close a year, the system will automatically checkbox and close off the year itself. Here, closing a year is the same as closing. When you close December 31st of a year, that closes your year. It does the month and the year at the same time. Any questions about this? Okay, on this third tab, it lets me identify how I want to call the periods. Do I want to call it period 1, period 2, or do I want to call it January through December? Do I want to call it, you know, whatever I want, my kids' names? That's already been set up for 12-month calendar. Okay, that concludes the section of the general ledger setup. Any questions?
No.
Okay, with that being said, I'm going to save the work, and I'm going to stop the recording and